to how to prepare for a group or panel interview. You know, while group or panel interviews are not that common, they do happen on occasion, so you want to be able to prepare and know what to expect. It's important to prepare for these types of interviews just like you would any other interview, in the sense that you really want to do good and thorough research on a company. However, there are very unique, I would say, nuances of these types of interviews that you really want to be prepared for as well. The reason that employers perform these types of interviews is that it allows them to be efficient and also to hire a lot of people at one time. You know, these types of interviews are performed with typically lower level positions like customer service, tellers, telephone agents, those types of positions. However, even though panel interviews are more efficient for the employer, it does take a lot more coordination to get everybody in the room at the same time, so it does sometimes add more days to the interview process. What's important to know, though, is that there are two types of interviews that we're talking about. There is the panel interview, where there is one candidate but multiple interviewers. And then there's the group interview, where there are just a few interviewers and then multiple candidates. We're going to talk about both types and how to prepare both mentally, and kind of what you should expect, and how you can really shine in those types of interviews. Hello and welcome to the Career Rescue Coach YouTube channel. My name is Dawn Casey. With over 20 years of experience in leading human resource departments and recruitment function, I help people now with their career challenges, changes, and of course questions. What makes this channel a little bit different is that I've worked in a variety of industries and for a variety of companies. So I guess you could say I now have inside information that I'd like to share with you in these videos. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and push the bell and get the latest videos and latest career news. Alright, so let's get to it. You know, I personally have experienced both types of interviews, the panel and the group interview, and I'd say out of the two, I really prefer the group interview. I remember one time, though, I was doing a panel interview and I walked into a room of 5 people sitting at the table. A little nerve-wracking, yes, but I enjoy meeting people and I enjoy the interview process. I'm kind of a weird person that way. And so I really enjoyed that experience. In that particular instance, I didn't get the job, but I learned a lot through that process. And I want to share some of those tips today with you. Today I'm going to share with you how to make these type of interview situations really work in your favor and how you can shine in these particular situations. So what I'd like to do, though, is take this opportunity again to clarify a little bit further about the difference between a panel interview and a group interview. So a panel interview, of course, is when you've got multiple interviewers and one candidate. I've had anywhere from 2 people up to 12 people sitting across from me, and it can be a little intimidating, but you know, it's really about addressing each individual as you go and you work through it. The group interview is when you have just a few interviewers but multiple candidates. And I actually prefer this type of interview much more because you can build off the answers of the other candidates, and it's much easier to have a conversation and create some connection with your interviewers versus just them shooting questions at you. So now what I'd like to is talk about specifically how you want to prepare for an interview before we get into the nuances of these particular interviews and how you prepare for those. Alright, so here are some steps on how you want to prepare. Number 1, you really want to review the job description. I know this seems really basic, but read it over several times and you'll notice that each time you read it over, you'll actually catch things you didn't catch the first time. Be sure to go to their website and look at the job description on their website, because sometimes there's more detail there as well. Also, as you're reading this job description, be sure to write down some questions. Questions like, who does this position report to? You know, who's part of the team? And what are the heavier aspects of this position? Are all really great starting questions. You know, just recently I went for a job interview myself, and as I read over the job description as part of my research on the job, the duties were just at such a higher level than what the title indicated, and I was just like, this doesn't match up, it doesn't make sense. So I did bring this up in my interview with the VP, and she just smiled and said, you know, you're exactly right. She says, I was trying to cast a wide net to see what type of candidates would apply, because I'm just so barren, I need so much help. I wanted to see what type of talent would apply. So I thought that was very interesting, but you know, I wouldn't have had that really constructive conversation had I not really dug into that job description and really understood what it was saying. Okay, number 2, research beyond the website. Now, you know, this is a big mistake a lot of people make. Don't just stop at just a few of the things on the website. Dig deep, find out about the company, learn about the company, and look for those news articles. I'll tell you what, those news articles are really important. Always, always look at the news articles. You'll learn things like, I don't know, whether the company was recently bought or sold, whether they went into bankruptcy, whether they're coming out of bankruptcy, whether they had a recent layoff. Things that as a candidate you'll want to know. Google them and see what you find out. Go look them up on their Facebook page and see what they're talking about. Most importantly, learn what your why is as to why you want to work for them. It's about you too. It's not just about a job or finding a job. So here's a quick story about this. Recently, I would say, well, more about 3 years ago, I went to interview for a company, and I did my research, and I looked at my news articles, and guess what I found? They had been recently purchased by an equity investment firm, and they were very excited about this because they were going to start experiencing a lot of growth because they now had some good funding behind them. You can bet I brought this up in an interview. I asked questions about how I could help them through this exciting time, and then also you know, what their fears were, and you know, and questions around that as well. Guess what? You can bet I got the job, and you can also bet I was the only one that even brought up that news article. Number 3, learn some of the company's values and mission statement. Now, I guarantee you 99% of other candidates will not do this. Learn about the company and what they value. Learn about what their mission is and whether you can get excited about that. The ultimate goal here is to find out whether their values align with your own personal values so that you may feel good about working for them. And so it also shows an employer that you're truly interested in working for them, which every employer wants to hear, right? All right, so I had a friend that did his research and then checked out the company's values before he went in for the interview. And it was really funny because one of the values was an odd value, and he didn't quite understand what it meant. So he was sure to ask the interviewer about this value during his interview, and the interviewer actually laughed and told my friend that no one had ever asked him that before, and he actually agreed it was kind of a funny value, but he went on to explain what it was about, and they had a really good conversation about it. And guess what? My friend got the job. It is those little things that you do and go the extra mile that really stand out to an employer and tells the employer that you're truly interested in working for them. Number 4, get your portfolio together or create one if you don't have one. You know, when a candidate shows up and has proof of their performance and the work that they have done over the months or years, it speaks so much more loudly than just speaking to projects, because you can then show the employer what you've done. You know, if it's a non-management job, you might want to gather some items together in a manila folder, such as, let's say, awards and customer letters, or any certifications that you've done, or samples of some projects that you've worked on. If it's a management role that you're going for, then a standard portfolio is a really good idea. This means purchasing a nice binder of some type, and then putting together maybe your resume, a complete list of your projects that you've done over the last 10 years, and then samples of your projects that you've actually worked on. Again, it's just so powerful to have your work in front of you speak for you, as well as being able to speak to several of the projects firsthand. You know, I had another friend who was an engineer, and he ended up deciding to put together a portfolio of some of his normal projects that he would work on day to day, but also he put in and threw in some extra projects that he really enjoyed working on that were outside of his normal job. You know, when he went and spoke with an employer, they started talking, and they got on the topic of what other projects he had worked on outside of his job, and he was able to demonstrate to the employer that he had other skills outside of just the normal day-to-day. And the employer was so impressed that he did end up getting the job, and on day one the employer assigned him to a special project in addition to his normal duties that was similar to one of the projects that he worked on, because the employer then learned that he was capable of so much more. So I can't tell you how important having a portfolio is. It just gives an employer a deeper insight as to what your capabilities truly are. Number 5, research your interviewers. You know, this is another really important thing that a lot of people just kind of glaze over, but when you look up your interviewers online, it really gives you insight as to who they are. So you want to get to know your interviewers, their backgrounds. You want to find out what schools they went to, what their hobbies or interests are. Get a true picture of who that person is so that you can potentially form a connection with them when you meet them. And you can even put together a question for each one of them based upon what you learned in LinkedIn. This all comes especially handy when you're getting ready for a panel interview. So as an example, if you're researching one particular individual, you find out that the person is an accountant, the type of answers that you'll want to give that person when they ask you a question is numbers-oriented and very detail-oriented. You know, the value of looking up your interviewers on LinkedIn should not be underestimated. I had a client once who was preparing for a panel interview. I had her call the recruiter and get the names of who she would be interviewing with, and then she looked them up on LinkedIn. She learned one of them had gone to her same college, another person had a common hobby, and yet another one of them actually had a mutual friend. So upon learning this information, it calmed her down because she felt like she had some connections going into this and some information about her interviewers. Now, during the interview, she felt like she was able to weave in the opening of the conversation this information. And she was able to form some really good connections with each of the panel interviewers right away. That connection continued throughout the conversation, and the interview went very, very well. She was very pleased when she was done. And guess what? They ended up extending an offer to her. So I wanted to say to you, don't underestimate the power of connection. So now let's talk about the psychology behind these interviews and what's behind each type of interview. So specifically, the panel interview is a bit intimidating because you have multiple interviewers, right? It's challenging to get to know each one of the panel interviewers and set up a conversation versus just them asking you questions. So it has its own unique nuances. So now let's talk about how do you prepare for a panel interview. All right, preparing for panel interviews. First, you want to make sure you perform your thorough research, as I mentioned above. You want to write down any questions you have about the company. And then you want to look up each one of your interviewers. Now, first you want to determine what type of person are they. Are they a numbers person? Are they an HR person? Are they going to want to hear about people? Are they a marketing person? So then you can tailor your responses to each of those people based upon what they want to hear. Also very important, look for connections, of course. What do you have in common with these people? What can you weave into the conversation? Also look to see if you have any connections that know these people and ask them questions about what type of personality they are so you have a little insight there as well. Now, if there's been a recent event that you found in a news article, be sure to ask each one of them their take on this event when you get an opportunity to ask questions. Practice your responses as you always would in preparation for an interview. Take a notepad with you. It's always good to be able to write down questions that you have along the way or thoughts or comments that they've made. Be punctual, prepared, and polished. And of course, smile throughout your interview. Be friendly and approachable. Here are some additional tips for panel interviews. Be thoughtful in your responses. Really think about what you're going to say for each response and what example you'd like to use. And try to use as many examples as possible to really show how you handle situations. Smile intentionally on various questions that you're responding to. Check in and ask to interview on occasion if you've answered their questions, so you're just kind of checking in. And ask for clarification when needed. Don't be afraid to ask questions if the question is not clear. So let's talk about the psychology behind the group interview. It is still a bit intimidating. You've got now other candidates in the room that you feel very competitive with. I will tell you to not worry about that, because oftentimes when people are doing group interviews, they have a lot of job openings. That's why they're doing it to begin with. So you're not competing for 1 or 2 positions. Typically, there are enough positions to go around. The thing you really want to focus on is that you want to bring out your personality, you want to show who you are, and you want to give really good examples. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Okay, so now let's talk about how best to prepare for a group interview. It is similar to a panel interview on the first few items. So you do your thorough research on the company. You write down any questions you have on the company. You look up each of your interviewers to find out what type of person they are, what kind of connections you can make with them, and also whether anyone knows them, so you can get to know, maybe find out what their personalities are like. Then you want to pull out that job description or that job ad that you have and go through each one of those criteria and put together an example. You want to be ready with your examples, because they're going to be looking for that same criteria in the group interview. And if you have your examples ready, you'll be just that much ahead. Practice your responses as you would for any other interview. Then take a notepad with you, because you'll want to note maybe some other people's responses to questions that you'd like to build on. Okay, so that's really important. Be punctual, prepared, and polished. When you walk in, be sure to introduce yourself to each of the interviewers so that you make a good impression right from the start. Now, here's a trick. Sit in the middle of the table. The reason you do this is you don't want to be the first few people to answer the questions, and you don't want to be the last, being stuck with the last to answer questions. You want to be right in the middle where you've heard some responses, you can maybe build on what they've got to say, and then be very creative in coming up with your own examples as well. So sit in the middle. And then, of course, smile throughout the interview, be friendly and approachable throughout the interview, and do not be competitive with your other candidates. It doesn't matter. You're competing just against yourself. Here's some additional tips. Don't compete with others. Be yourself. Show your personality and your sense of humor. That's what stands out. Build off of other people's examples. Be sure to speak up, laugh, and respond to some of the questions first. But you don't always have to be first. You can be second or third or fourth, too. Try and mix it up a bit. Now, also you want to have your notepad and be able to write down any additional examples that you think of. Notepad is really invaluable in this type of interview. And this is what's going to really make a person stand out, is by offering examples of depth that show knowledge. A lot of times people are nervous in these interviews and they have shallow examples. Be sure to provide examples that have more depth, that really demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of the role. Be prepared for role play. The interviewers may choose to act as a customer, as an example, and give everyone a scenario that they'll role play with. And remember, in those role plays, always, always, always answer the question directly. Okay, that's a tip. I've been in a role play where most candidates don't answer the initial question of whatever the role play is. So be sure to do that. Be kind and gracious to the other candidates. Don't talk over everybody. And remember, there's often always more jobs than people in the room, so don't worry about that. The main difference between the panel interview and the group interview is the objective for each. In a panel interview, the objective really is to create connection and, of course, show your knowledge for the job, but creating some connections so they want to work with you. In a group interview, your goal is to stand out with good examples and depth of experience for the role. So keep that in mind, just those two objectives, and you'll do very well. Okay, so we've covered the 2 types of interviews. We talked about how to properly prepare for interviews and discussed the psychology behind those 2 types of interviews. We've also walked through how to specifically prepare for those interviews. Then we've confirmed what the objective for each type of interview is. Now, here's a fun slide. I just had to make you guys laugh a little bit. Always we think we look more nervous than other people think that we appear to be. So don't worry about it. Everyone's a little bit nervous going into these types of interviews. Remember to subscribe to this channel and push the bell to get the latest and greatest videos. Be sure to check me out on the Career Rescue page, Facebook page for great articles, and then the group page for discussions and questions. And be sure to make a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Dawn Casey at the Career Rescue Coach, and remember, change your job, change your life. Thanks for being here.